What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Hanging Heavy. And this is not just any old regular episode of that stupid show, but it's the Halloween edition. Ooh. Today I'm going to do things a little bit different, seeing as it's going to be for Halloween. So if you guys are listening to it on Halloween, fucking awesome. If not, then it was all for nothing. So today, I'm not going to give you the normal bullshit that I do. I'm going to go ahead and read some scary stories. Ooh. So let's get into that. This first scary story comes from the website darknessprevails.org, where they have real ghost stories, creepypasta, and paranormal sightings. This first story is called Nahuales Skinwalkers. And it reads, "Hello, I'm a 25-year-old male. This is a story I was told by my grandmother before she started losing her memory due to old age. Story starts off in San Luis Potosi, Mexico. My grandmother during the time was only 19. She's in her late 80s now. In the town she lived in, her dad was an important man, and her family was very wealthy, allowing her to live a privileged life. My grandma was aware of this, and she at times would feel guilty and bad seeing how good she had it, and how many Indian tribes there were living in poor conditions, or starving. So she would bring food to the starving Amerindian kids. From an early age, my grandmother was very interested in the occult and the brujeria, witchcraft. The Indian tribes practiced throughout much of what was kept in secret due to the strict racial division and the strict Catholic Church. So when she heard about a group of kids at one of the Indian villages being Nahuales, she became overly excited and had to go see them. Apparently these kids would transform into animals or into weird animal-human hybrids for food or cash. When my grandmother did arrive with food and gifts, she would ask the children, "Haz la zorita," do the little fox. And at this, and seeing she had gifts, 3 of the 5 kids before her very eyes transformed into foxes. The others transformed into lanky humanoid figures with a fox head. She found this to be cute and adorable, so she made it a habit to come and visit them often. She often found there were many other Nahuales living in the village, some even in her own town. Some weren't full native, but mestizo like her. She found out some people were born Nahuales, while others learned how to do it through a process of animal blood and rolling in dead people's ashes. Over the years, the Catholic Church gained more power, and the government became more corrupt and racist, and driven many of the Indian villages towards the mountains and countryside, and away from the townsfolk. With them, the Nahuales left as well. I've been interested in seeing one myself. I've read that during the colonization of Latin America, the Aztec Empire would use Nahuales in their army to sneak into conquistadors' camps at night and kill them during their sleep. This next story is credited by Skinwriter. This is a story about a culmination of events that happened over a course of a decade, or almost a decade, from when I was a small child to the present day. It's probably one of the most unnerving things that's happened to me, and I'm going to share it. It started after we moved to the country, outside of Afton, Oklahoma. Afton is a very small town that is barely big enough to be on the weather map. It's mostly a residential area for Grove, Miami, and Veneta, as there are very few places an Afton resident can work. My father moved out there to the country by my grandmother, down the road actually. It was out in the middle of nowhere. I lived most of the year with my mother and stepfather, but during the summer and every other weekend, I'd spend it, or most of it, with my biological father. The house was on a hill, as was our neighbors, and my grandparents up the road. You'd go up this huge hill, and then you'd drive by my grandparents, and further down the road, you'll drive on a ridge, and there's a split to go to our neighbors, or go down the ridge to our house. It may not seem important, but it'll save some explanation later. That area was by a creek called Horse Creek. Horse Creek had a legend surrounding it that a tribe of Creek Indians was living on that land in the mid-1800s. The Union wanted to take the small snippets of land on the border of Indian Territory, so they sectioned off a bit and went in to find it inhabited by Creek Indians. So they decided to kill them all. They sent the cavalry to secure the village and force the warriors upstream. They positioned riflemen to pick them off one by one. They shot them in the creek like animals, and the horses continued to run upstream until the water rose too high and they drowned trying to escape. I will post another time with my experience with that, but back to this. When I was little, I remember seeing a very tall man, or a shadow of a man, in the woods by the house. Whenever I looked at it, it would hide behind a tree. This went on for a few years, and I got older. I'd hear whispers, sometimes, that would pierce the air. I always brushed it off as me just hearing things. As I continued to get older, things started to quiet down just a bit, but they started to pick up again after one night. It was a weekend, and my father came in at night and told me to stay inside because he saw a tall man outside, and he grabbed his gun and the dogs, and he went outside to confront this man. There was a singular power light outside, and when my father got out there, there was nothing. Things picked up from that, relatively short after. My father was sitting outside at night, and our dogs perked up their ears and turned to the barbed wire fence and started growling deeply and viciously. We had a basset hound and still had 2 dachshunds. The basset, Sophie, was a sweetheart and never growled at anything. And they growled at the darkness like they hated it with their very being. My father went inside to get his gun, and whatever it was gone by the time he returned. My father eventually took up a job at a wellness center around 30 minutes away, and left me alone for most of it, if not all, in the morning. One day, we looked out our bathroom window that overlooked the pasture down at the bottom of the ridge, and we saw a single coyote. That's why my father had called me in, but it walked wrong. It stumbled, but kept a steady pace, stumbling but not slowing down at all. And it was the middle of the day. Most coyotes come out at night to hunt, but not this one. We took out a pair of binoculars and looked at it. Then it, I kid you not, started galloping into the trees like some kind of horse. A few times I heard my father calling me, but the problem with this was that he was at his job 30 minutes away, and his voice didn't sound right. It was too resonant, like he was yelling through a tube. Sometimes I'd be outside and I'd hear 3 sharp whistles, but I assumed it was the birds. There were lots of birds, but after doing some digging, there were no birds that could have made that noise. Sometimes I'd hear this terrifying screech out of the hills. It pierced the air and felt like a knife on your eardrums. I always thought it was some kind of animal, but again, no animal could have made that noise. We'd go camping occasionally by the creek, and we'd feel watched. or I field watch. One night, I went to relieve myself up at the ridge of the woods by the clearing, and as I finished up, I heard a branch snap nearby me. I know that only two things snap branches: large animals and people. I saw no deer, and all of the cows were about a mile away from us. I heard a thud, 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 like footsteps, heavy footsteps. I quickly went down back to the campsite. Here's the pinnacle. One night, a few years ago, we were driving home, and it was a clear night. The sun had set an hour previous. Then as we were driving down the road, a fog swept across the road. That confused me. Then something dashed across the road. It was around 7 feet tall and had spines running up and down its back. It had slender limbs that were bone thin, and it had large hands and long claws. It had long legs and large feet, and it had a slouched position. When the headlights hit it, it took 2 strides to get across the road, and a third to bound over the ditch and barbed wire fence on the other side. I shouted, "Whoa!" and my father just saw a blur. I was silent for the rest of the drive home. The next day, my father left, and I went outside to see the dogs, and there was a tall figure standing at our mailbox, up at the top of the hill. I thought I was seeing things. It went away a few hours later. A few hours later, or the next day, we were coming back from something and checked the mailbox. Some of the dirt was displaced. I didn't notice until I remembered. I didn't notice it because it was so big. It was a handprint. That thing's handprint. We moved away a few years ago. I'm not sure about anything, but after hearing more stories and accounts, I think it was a skinwalker, a Native American monster. They're a tall humanoid thing that steals the skin of animals and other people and wears them to become them. But there's always something small they get wrong. They can mimic voices and sounds, but they always get it slightly wrong. Oklahoma has a long history of Native Americans living here, and also has a large, or a very large number of disappearances that the body was never found, and a lot of unsolved murders. I'm glad we don't live there anymore. That's my story, and I'm terrified to wonder why it didn't actively hunt me. But I'm glad it didn't. Update. I went to my grandmother's recently and stayed there. We got to talking, and she talked about the last time I tried to stay, when I was a little girl. She said that I started screaming and crying in the middle of the night. We both chuckled, and I said I thought there was a tall man standing at the entrance of the room. As soon as that left my mouth, the reality of what I said hit me. It had silently run out the door when I screamed and yelled. It was watching me that close. I decided to go walking while I was there. There was a multitude of cows that were down in a little clearing of trees inside one of the forests surrounding the pasture. I walked down the ridge, and something spooked them, and they ran with their calves away from the spot. Before they all left, a calf mooed for its mother. Then the exact moo, only more resonant, came from behind the trees. Then its mother mooed, and it fled. I was feeling brave and stupid, and thought, well, let's go find my monsters. Skinwalkers hide or take something else's shape during the day. They're stalkers, hunters. They're smart, unlike their Wendigo cousins. The cow herd started coming on my way, and it was filled with heifers and calves. Never, ever get close to a heifer's calf. It was herded towards the trees, and it terrified me. I walked over to the tree line and looked into the forest. Something darted behind 2 trees. I heard a sickening bone crunch and slurping like something picked up a squirrel and just bit into her side to chew all the bones and suck its body dry. That's when I bugged up and ran up the ridge. I felt watched, so I picked up a stick. I didn't know what might happen, but I thought that if it ran at me, it would force the stick through its chest using its own running momentum. But here, as I type this, nothing had happened. And one of my dachshunds died last month. That's my update. This next story comes from Reddit. The title: My brother saw a ghost as a kid. 2 decades later, I realized what he actually saw. I was about 7 years old, my brother about 10. It was well past our bedtime when our mom woke up off the couch to put us to bed. Our dad worked construction out of town back then, so it was often just us 3 at the house, for weeks at a time. Up the stairs and to the immediate right was our parents' bedroom. Going left put you in the middle of a hallway. Taking another left down that hallway led to my brother's room. The opposite end was my room, which was also across the hall from upstairs bathroom. At the other end of the hallway are windowed doors. We always kept them locked and rarely used them. The door on my end led to a balcony overlooking our front yard, and the door on my brother's end opened up to our back porch. The house kind of leans into a small hill. My brother and mom both had a habit of waking up in the middle of the night to use the restroom. I only knew this because I was always a light sleeper, and they just couldn't help but flush with the door wide open. This night, however, my brother stopped on his way to his room and came back towards the bathroom. I'm gonna try to pee before I go back to bed. The past few nights, I've been too afraid to walk to the bathroom. I keep seeing a man wearing stripes at the end of the hallway. I don't know if my mom wrote it off as my brother telling ghost stories to try to scare me, or if she was already half asleep and didn't catch it. But she didn't react at all to my brother's confession. I, on the other hand, was terrified by it. The fear of seeing a ghost like that at the end of the hallway or through the windows is the reason I started running from the stairs to my bedroom at night. Years later, when I was about 18, my mom and I were having a conversation in her car about a dog we had for a very short time. When I was little, we were sharing stories about Max's tendencies toward destroying my shoes and other unruly behaviors when my mom blurted out, "Do you remember that time I opened the front door for the cops and Max ran inside to the kitchen and started tearing open that big bag of dog food we had?" This really caught me by surprise because in all these years I lived in that house, we never once called the cops. Gun owner family in a quiet, rural West Virginia neighborhood, etc., etc. I asked her what she was talking about, and she looked equally surprised as she had just revealed something by accident. "Oh, that's right. I never told you because you were too young at the time. One night, I woke up hearing noises outside my window, and when I looked, I saw a man staring into my bedroom." She went to describe how turning on the lights caused the man to take off running, and how she grabbed my dad's pistol before calling the cops. I can't remember all the details I gave them when they showed up. Tall, white male, wearing a striped shirt and jeans, short, dark hair, something like that. They said it matched the description of a man they were looking for in the area. It turns out he had escaped from a jail on a murder charge. Now, it sounds so obvious hearing these two stories back to back, but it wasn't until a few years ago, in my mid-20s, that I pieced together that my brother had unwillingly warned us of a murderer that had been casing our house for several days. This last story I found on creepypasta.com. How original. The title simply Blood Magic. I was almost friends with a monster when I was 11 years old. I would have preferred a human friend, but my family had just moved to a new city where everyone was cold and distant. My father promised that I would meet new people at school, but there were still a few weeks of summer and I had nothing to do. Alyssa Williams was the only one I really wanted to be friends with. She lived next door in a beautiful gray house with a high fenced yard. I used to sit back and watch, listening to her play and giggle with my back to the fence, the sound bubbling up like music made for everyone but me. I wasn't brave enough to introduce myself, but after a few days of moping around, my mother volunteered to do it for me. I stood behind her, carrying a basket of cookies, while she knocked on the neighbor's door. "Alyssa!" The man who opened it looked like a poorly shaved bear. "Get over here and meet your new friend." "We're busy!" came the shrill response from somewhere deeper in the house. My mother marveled about the woodworking and craftsmanship and asked the age of the vulnerable structure. "Now, Alyssa!" the bear bellowed. "I know you're alone up there." A short, angry sigh, like what circus lions must do before they're forced onto stage. Then footsteps creaking down the stairs. "I've got cookies," I supplied hopefully. "Alyssa spends all day playing by herself," the bear said. "She's been so lonely since her mother has passed. Some company would be good for her." I thought about the giggling I heard through the fence, and I didn't understand how someone could have such a good time on their own. Alyssa appeared a moment later, her head hanging low in surly obedience. She wore shorts and long socks pulled halfway up her thighs, one bright green and the other purple. That's all I really saw because I was so embarrassed I couldn't look up from the basket of cookies I held out. Alyssa snatched the whole basket and briskly turned around again. I glimpsed a wave of black hair, curly like her father's, but not so wild. A few steps, she turned to glare over her shoulder with the expression of a vegan might give a barbecue. "Well, are you coming or not?" I had taken my second step before she cut in. "Shoes off," I hasted to obey. "No, the socks stay on. What are you, some kind of barbarian?" "No, ma'am." I don't know why I said that, but I was scared of her and I didn't want to give her any reason to send me away. Alyssa seemed satisfied with the answer though, and she permitted me to follow her up the stairs towards her room. I felt like I was on solid ground until she said, "We don't need any more friends. None of our games have room for a third person." "Your dad said..." "He isn't my dad. He killed my father and took me prisoner." "Oh, yes," she said, pivoting her socked heel on the wooden floor so smoothly that she seemed to almost float. "But that's okay, because sometimes he brings me little boys to eat." I could only hope that my stunned silence was mistaken for composure. Alyssa rolled her eyes and opened the door to her room. "Just kidding. You're not stupid, are you?" I didn't realize I was holding my breath until that moment. "I'm sorry, that wasn't a fair question. Most stupid people don't know they're stupid. And I suppose it's perfectly fine if you are, as long as you don't try to perform surgery, or vote, or do anything a normal person would do," Alyssa rambled. The stairway and hall we passed were heavily decorated with framed portraits, hanging tapestries, and ornate tables littered with precious and intricate things. It was a stark contrast to Alyssa's room, which had a simple metal frame bed in the corner and a dark wood cabinet on the other side. The walls were painted black and the window was concealed beneath a thick curtain. There was nothing on the hardwood floor to disrupt the monastic austerity. "How do you play games without any toys?" I asked. "We play blood games," she said, stressing the plural again. "The kind that need magic to work. You do know about magic, don't you?" "Yeah, sure, of course I do." I didn't want to say anything to betray my ignorance. I reached for a cookie from the basket, but she slapped my hand away. I stood in disbelief as she ate one of the cookies herself. "My mother taught me after she passed," Alyssa said, casually, moving to set the cookies on the cabinet. She retrieved something and turned to face me again. "If you want to play, then you'll need to give me your hand." What do you mean, after she passed?" I tentatively stretched out to her. "Now close your eyes." She could have told me to jump out the window and I probably would have done it. She had the sweetest smile on her face, and the soft brush of her fingers tracing my palm made me blush. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "Don't scream. Mother hates screamers." I opened my eyes, a sliver, just in time to see a metallic flash in the air. Alyssa's grip tightened around my wrist, while her free hand gouged the needle into the center of my palm. I didn't scream exactly. It was more of a shrieking, yelping sound, like a rabbit trying skydiving for the first time. I tore my hand away with the needle still in it, blood freely running between my fingers. "Come back here!" Alyssa shouted. "You're going to make a mess!" We both dashed for the door. I hesitated to avoid running into her, so she pushed me aside and didn't slow until she locked the door. And I was still inside. "You're wasting the blood! Give me your hand!" "No, you'll stab me again!" I gingerly pulled the needle out of my skin, prompting a fresh swell of blood. I felt dizzy. "Baby," she snorted. That hurt slightly more than the needle. "You're already bleeding, so I don't need to stab you, now do I? Here, wipe some on me." She offered me the back of her hand. Bewildered, I rubbed a long smear on her pale skin. Her dark eyes sparkled as she watched with eager fascination. I almost took the opportunity to flee, but I couldn't resist asking, "How does blood magic work?" Mother said that when the world was young, all living things were connected, and the same blood flowed from one to the next. Alyssa plucked the needle from my fingers and pricked her clean hand, dainty, to draw forth a single drop of blood. We started to fight one another, though, and it got worse and worse until we had pulled apart into separate entities. We became so distant that we started taking different shapes, and some animals even preyed upon others, until we forgot that we were even the same. The blood is the only part of us that never forgets. Using the nail of one index finger, she deftly traced a pattern in my blood. A circle with a triangle inside, and a square inside of that, and perhaps even a tiny pentagon within it. With deep concentration, she pressed a single drop of blood into the center of the design. "Now what are you doing?" I asked. She smiled, but the gesture seemed strained and unnatural, like a dog baring its teeth for a dog food commercial. "Duh," she said. "I'm making magic." And she was. The pattern of blood on her hand was glowing. Soft at first, but growing brighter in even pulses. My heart began to race with excitement, and the pulsing light increased to match its rhythm. "What's it do?" I asked. "It's gonna grow you a friend," she said. "That's what you want, isn't it?" I wanted to tell her that I didn't need a friend anymore because I had her. But we always don't get what we want, even from ourselves. Especially from ourselves. "Yeah, sure. That's what I came here for," I said. "Okay, watch." The light grew stronger. I couldn't look away. The pattern was moving now. The triangle was turning inside the circle, and the square within that which moved in the opposite direction, away from the center. And from the center, a red stalk, like a time-lapse bean struggling through her skin, to sprout and curl into the air. Within a breathless moment, the stalk had growing over a foot. The veins of Alyssa's hands glowed beneath her skin like a network of roots, and from that strange plant, an even stranger fruit began to swell. "What is his name?" Alyssa asked. How about Sid?" The fruit looked like an organ with a face. I didn't know what a fetus looked like at the time, but when I saw pictures when I was older, I knew that's what it was. "How big will he be?" "I want him to be taller than he is," I said. She smiled. "What?" I said, "We'll be playing sports and stuff. I want to win." "What does Sid like to eat?" she asked. I glanced around the room, empty, spotting the basket. Cookies, I guess? It was larger now. I could make out tiny hands and feet pressing against the transparent cocoon. "And what does he love?" Her voice fainter now, straining with exertion. Her glowing veins extended all the way down her arm now, and for the first time I realized the concentration on her face was mixed with pain. "I don't know. I don't think I like this game. I don't want to play anymore." "You can't stop now. What does Sid love?" Alyssa took a sharp intake of breath and grimaced. The plant had stopped growing, and the swiftly gorging fruit was about the size of a watermelon. How was it getting so big? Was it filling up with her blood? "Stop it," I said, my voice cracked. But I didn't care. "Make it go back. Cut it off." "It's not an it," she grunted. "His name is Sid, and he's already alive. You have to tell me what he loves, or he will be nothing but..." "I hate it. I hate him. Make him go away, please. Hurry. You're part of the spell too. I can't do this alone," she said. It wasn't a watermelon anymore. It was the size of a dog and beginning to grow coarse fur. Now it was heavy enough that Alyssa had to kneel and rest it on the ground. The hands and feet were becoming more defined and solid by the second. Its eyes fluttered once, and then opened to pierce me with pale, sightless orbs. "Mr. Williams!" I screamed. "Mr. Williams, help! It's hurting her!" Thunder on the stairs, but the wretched thing reacted to the noise and flailed its arms. One wild claw pierced straight through its encompassing sack, and it clawed into the open air, an inch from my face. Bright red fingers clutched the tattered opening and ripped it wide in a rush of blood. All at once, Sid was free and on the ground, standing almost as tall as me. Pounding on the door, it was still locked. "What's going on in there, Alyssa? Are you okay?" She laid panting on the ground. The blood was beginning to evaporate into a thick red mist. I choked and fell to the ground to avoid breathing in the heavy, wet air. The tattered sack, the discarded dying stem, both withering before my eyes. Sid was crouched in terror, its matted blue fur showing through the evaporated blood. "Open the door! Boy, are you in there?" I crawled across the ground to unlock the door. More pounding, louder, and more desperate than ever. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Sid flinching at the resounding crash. The instant I fully turned away from it to unlock the door, I heard Alyssa scream. I pounded back the lock, and the enormous pressure on the other side made the door spring like a snap. The man was roaring, but it was too late. Alyssa's stomach had been savagely opened. Sid loomed over her, digging through her stomach, as though searching for something. When it turned to face Mr. William Onslaught, it was shoveling a bloody clump into its mouth. Mr. Williams almost caught it, but it bounded away just in time. The bear man moved to the window to block its retreat. but he again missed it when Sid lunged for the basket on the cabinet instead. By the time Mr. Williams caught up with it, Sid had already fled through the door. "It's my fault," I heaved for air. Mr. Williams knelt above his daughter, clenching her soaked body to his chest. "I could have shaped it," I said. "I could have told it not to hurt anyone. I'm sorry." "We need to get out of the house," he said. I followed him downstairs, though I knew it would return. The monster had been born, but with one desire, and it would stop at nothing to get it. There was nothing left to satisfy it here. A cookie monster was born that day. So yeah, that's all I had for today's Halloween special edition. This last story was kind of dumb, not gonna lie, but that's all I got. So you know what? Fucking let's roll with it. It was good up until that stupid ending. But yeah, like always, I'm Desecrator. You know the bullshit. I'm not gonna go through it today. Have a happy Halloween. Be safe. If you're gonna get fucked up, have one for me. Rich and rare.